well as a wonderful person. Both of her MA papers are of publishable quality, and I hope to see them in print soon. And I want to just say that it's students like Sharifa, and what a wonderful representative she is of all of you. Such a profound privilege to know Sharifa and be part of her education. Sharifa.
Thank you to all the teachers and the professors here. Professor Goodwin, you messed me up. And Frank, you said no serious or depressing speeches. You should have called me. I would like to thank all of the English professors that are here today, as well as those who are not, and especially those whose courses that I've taken, because those professors all helped me to understand why I needed to be here at the College of Staten Island. Professor Sarah Benish, who introduced me to sociolinguistics and helped me uncover and reconcile my own experiences with linguistic discrimination, and whose classes came to be my most self-actualizing and intellectually affirming. She introduced me to Keith Gilliard, the then president of the National Council of Teachers of English, but he was from the same hood that I was from. Then she introduced me to his book, Voices of the South, which told his story of linguistic discrimination. I was completely blown away because as Gilliard told his story, he also told mine, page after page. This led me to find my own voice, which in turn has led me to this space today. Professor Benish helped me understand why I needed to be here. Professor Marianne Fayola discussed with me at length Afrabin's novel, Orinoco, the Royal African Slave, to help me better understand what is called the African Maafa, or more commonly known as the transatlantic slave trade. And therefore, she helped me better understand why I, again, needed to be here. Professor Dalia Candiotti, on the first night of her class, we didn't even get in the door good, and she showed us James Allen's traveling photo exhibit without sanctuary. I've never sat so rooted to my chair in a classroom with so many mixed emotions. It's an exhibit that uncovers the spectacle that lynchings of African Americans became in the Jim Crow South. Allen exposes the horror of lynchings as he puts on display the photographs and postcards of these lynchings that the lynchers kept as souvenirs that were passed down from generation to generation. That was the South that my father, who died last year, that's the South that he had to escape from. When I pulled up the images on my laptop to show my dad, he remembered that time and place. So he also reminded me why I needed to be here. Professor Holler, whose 19th century literature class was themed around American women's writing and its connection to women's rights and slavery, informed me that I rightfully and necessarily needed to be here. I had never read a slave narrative before, and we read slave narratives written by various women writers, but most importantly, we read several narratives written by real slaves, my ancestors, and as a descendant of African slaves, these narratives were about me. Professor Goldner's class gave me the works of Zora Neale Hurston, whom I had heard of, but had never read before. But I knew that Alice Walker had fallen in love with her and decided to make her her muse. So I made Zora mine for a time as well. Walker and Hurston, celebrated African American women writers, reminded me that I had a space here at CSI in which to write. I had no idea that coming to CSI, the school around the corner, and literally I live right around the corner, would have such a profound impact on my life and my family's life. So let me also thank my family, especially my husband, for allowing me the space in our lives to complete what I started here. They all made space for me to do this. Even when it got really tough and my dad got so sick, and we knew he was going to die, even he would still say to me, Sharifa, don't you have some schoolwork you need to go to? Thank you, Professor Goodland, for giving me permission to grieve the loss of my father the way I needed. And I could put this moment right here off for a season or two. In retrospect, I didn't know that what I started here would be much more than just going back to school. I didn't know it would be more like how my oldest daughter, Whitney, would tell me, Ma, go get your life. And that is exactly what I and all of us graduates here have received, a new, expanded life. This was a very long journey for me to get to this point. Neither of my parents attended college, nor their parents before them. So they really couldn't help me navigate those waters after high school, so I didn't go straight to college. I did what they had done. I went straight to work. However, it didn't take me long to remember that I liked school. I thrived there and I missed it. So I started by taking just one class at a local college downtown Brooklyn. It took me 3 schools and 16 years as a single parent to get my bachelor's degree. And believe me, sometimes it got really crazy. At one point, as I was attending NYU, I would leave my job downtown Brooklyn, hop on the train to school, which was thankfully downtown Manhattan, so the ride was relatively quick, take a class, hop back on the express train all the way out to Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn, pick up my daughter from after school, get back on the train, drop her to her grandmother's house, then get back on the train again to school and take another class. And that went on until she was like in junior high and could travel a little bit better by herself. However hectic it was though, my example of education by any means necessary did pay off as she is a college graduate today. As I look back over 16 years of schooling, I realized my real education did not begin until I came to CSI. I recently heard an analogy that likened the difference between schooling and education to trees. Schooling has broad trunks, soaring branches, and abundant foliage, which can hide things in plain sight, things that might really need to be exposed. Schooling also has shallow roots, which makes it most vulnerable in a storm. Education, however, has deep roots and is most trusted and stable in a storm. And education answers the fundamental questions of who am I and why am I here? The answer to that question, at least for me, lies in the knowledge and honest and accurate knowledge of culture. But it needed to be my culture. That kind of critical education builds the knowledge of self and necessarily builds student self-esteem. And most importantly for me, what my professors gave me was a critical hope inside that helped me navigate the stress of balancing a family, losing a father, and struggling to get A's on my papers over these last few years. Critical education and critical hope interrupt stereotype threat, the situation in which one might find themselves at the risk of conforming to and confirming the stereotypes that have been inscribed by popular culture about the group or groups one may belong to. Critical education increases the Pygmalion effect, which theorizes that when one internalizes positive labels, they therefore succeed accordingly. And I'm a living example of this. Education, not schooling, ultimately gives one a critical growth mindset, whereas we become comfortable questioning information given to us that just doesn't make sense to us anymore. It was the aforementioned critical education offered to me by my professors that told me that I needed to be here. I deserved to be here and made me believe that I could be successful here. The lesson that has loomed so large in my thinking through this educational experience is the difference between equity and equality. We know that many have fought and are still fighting for equal education and educational conditions in the United States, where equal means we all should have access to the same standard of education. And yes, we do. However, if we look at the matter a little more critically, we can liken it to having an analogy of maybe two thirsty people, and they are each handed the same bottle of water. That determines that they have been both treated equally. However, equity begs the question, before the water is randomly assigned, well, what exactly are you, particularly you, student, what are you thirsty for? And equity uses that information to determine what is given, because I may not be thirsty for the same thing that the student next to me may be thirsty for. So before we just hand out everyone the same bottle of water for the sake of equality, let's try and determine which culture is thirsty for what and give them what they need to succeed. That's equity. People, students, especially those that find their group way out on the fringes of the margins, need a critical cultural education so they can determine who they are in the face of all the varied voices, perceptions, and images that they are all pelted with on a daily basis. And then they can build on a stable, self-affirming foundation. The teachers I had here in the English department attempted to understand me and others around me and offered us what they considered an equitable education. In order to generally consider equity, one must have a capacity for empathy. And empathy is just attempting to place oneself in another person's shoes. Empathy helps teachers to honestly discuss and complicate the hard issues in our culture, like discrimination, microaggressions, privilege, standard English, our heteronormative society, slavery, which students make up the majority of special ed classes and why. Why is the Confederate flag still flying high in South Carolina, and why Black Lives Matter? Empathetic teachers understand that 50% of the schools in the United States do not have a single teacher of color on staff, and that only 7 to 20% of current teacher education students nationwide are students of color. That less than 10% of full-time college faculty across the United States are professors of color. That said, empathetic teachers understand that the majority of teachers don't come to the profession predisposed to think about what the roles of equity, diversity, and justice have to do with teaching. Therefore, empathetic teachers are willing to engage differently by forming caring relationships, providing culturally relevant material, and cultivating empathetic responsiveness in their pedagogy. I found that type of teacher here in this master's program right around the corner at CSI. Professor Kelly Bradbury, who is no longer teaching here, introduced me to African-American educationalist and author Lisa Delpit, who said in her essay in the Harvard Review, "We do not really see through our eyes or hear through our ears, but through our beliefs. If you believe this to be true, then you must be willing to put your beliefs, my teacher, on hold, and be willing to see yourself in the unflattering light of another's gaze. It is the only way to learn what it might feel like to be someone else, and that's the only way to start the dialogue." I'm thankful for the professors and the friends and all the relationships that I've made here. I'm thankful and grateful that my professors were willing to take the time to not only begin the dialogue with me, but to remind me again and again, and then again, why I needed to be here and stay here. Thank you for letting me share.